Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I know I'm rarely here. I promise I'll be back more this year, okay? But I have a rant. I have a rant I need to go off on, get off my chest. Get yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, because this might take a little bit of time. But I cannot stop thinking about the UK riots. I am obsessed, dare I say. And I think I have a right to be, the whole immigration issue, getting banned from the UK, if you don't know, that happened to me for holding a cheeky little pride parade in a Muslim no-go zone called Luton. It affected my life a lot. Me saying that mass immigration is going to cause extreme cultural clashes and perhaps even be the death of the West has affected my life every day to this point. To this point, people see my name on a credit card, anything. Like, I get discriminated against in stores. I get, canceled. Just last year, a couple of years ago, I'm getting canceled by my local news and local university, UBC, for being far-right, white supremacists, this, that, and the other. If you go to my Wikipedia page, they actually have a section where it talks about Lauren's views. And they quote an interview I did with the Times in which it's like, Lauren rejects the label far right, but while rejecting the label far right, she said that there was going to be a race war in the UK because of mass immigration. So clearly she's just an insane racist. Like, who would say that other than an insane racist? And then fast forward however many years, and I'm sitting here watching a race war take place in the streets of the UK. I was right. Like, I was correct. I don't care how many journalism degrees, masters, whatever you have, awards for writing for the BBC, like, you are wrong, I was right, okay? There is extreme racial tension going on in the streets of the Western world, obviously. Now, am I Nostradamus? Like, am I the smartest woman on the earth that I was able to predict this? No. In fact, a lot of it was intuition to me. Intuition, as well as like the places I grew up in Canada, all of them, like the 2 and 3 cities that I spent most of my childhood in, are on the top 20 crime cities in my whole country and immigration cities in my whole country. So it was just something like I grew up around and I saw every day, and I thought, wow, not being able to speak the same language as the people around you causes a lot of problems. Having different ideas of what law, morality, and gender relations are, man, that causes a lot of problems. So much so that, like, I have whole racial groups that live in cities around me that don't even talk to each other. That's kind of crazy. So, like, I lived it. And when I was younger and I would try and go on podcasts or shows and talk about it, it's like I almost couldn't explain it because it was so obvious to me. And because of that, I just got called racist a lot. I just got branded as racist, and so did everyone else that was bringing up this issue. So it's like, it was just intrinsic to me when I was younger, and I never understood. I was like, are journalists just lying? Do they really not know the world is like that? Like, I think as I got a bit older, I started to realize, oh, these people grew up in extraordinarily privileged social circles in which they probably never even saw the kind of immigration that I saw growing up. Like, their friends who were immigrants would have been rich, well-educated, spoken the same language as them, none of the same social issues that the average working class person had to deal with. So they're literally just coming at it from an entirely different worldview. And ironically, despite all of their yapping about putting yourself in other people's shoes and checking your privilege, never did it and just called anyone who disagreed with them a racist. So that was just great. Even to this day, when I debate leftists about this subject, they still make the accusation like, just admit you hate brown people. That's why you don't like mass immigration, Lauren. I've traveled the world now. So on top of my childhood, having seen the problems with immigration, I have traveled the world and I've met working class people from every single country, background, from Africa to South America to they will all tell you, hey, there's big problems with immigration of all different groups of people. Well, even white people coming into some areas, people are like, wow, they're really changing the culture here. I think the lefties, you call that gentrification. Like, of course, immigration causes issues, but why is it so hard for people? Why is it so hard for the average person to explain their frustrations with it? Why is it so hard to get it across to leftists that this is a real crisis? And I think this is what I want to go over today. Because I want to put all of my thoughts down into one video that I can reference. Because quite frankly, the issue is not something that can be put down into a talking point. It's not something that can really be extrapolated from data or like a study. It's like, it really is just something observed in day-to-day life that is so hard to explain on the internet. And I think what it is the mass migration crisis really comes down to the complexity of individual social relationships, which is so nebulous and hard to explain. Most people will not even try. They won't even bother trying because every individual social relationship is so different. Most people's day-to-day interactions are not being studied. And yet, when we're trying to address this issue, we are always talking about political solutions and people as groups and institutions and data sets. We talk about fixing problems with the institutions, and we never view any of these things or people as like individuals living unique lives, all working together like ants that need to keep it going. And if one of those ants like starts falling off the wagon and a few others join it, the whole thing collapses. But because we never think of this as individual social relationships, I really think we're constantly missing the true understanding going on here. Like when I think about trying to talk about this with the internet, there was early days. I was doing a debate on immigration, I think, and I got mocked massively by left-wing Twitter, left-wing internet for quoting the political analyst Ray Wolfinger, who stated the plural of anecdote is data. And that's true. He is correct. I don't know why I got mocked for this. Like, stats come from somewhere. They have an origin point somewhere in real people's lives. Of course, the plural of anecdote is data. Like, and you quite frankly, you don't understand what any data you are seeing or reading online, any graphs that we're quickly liking or retweeting on Twitter. We don't know what any of it means until you've actually seen it play out in the real world. Not to bring this into the gender debate because, oh my goodness, people lose their minds, but let's take that stat that we see all the time, like women end 70% of marriages because they're the ones, that file the paperwork. Well, what does that actually mean in the real world? Does that mean that they're the ones that said, I want out and I'm ending this, I hate you? Or does it mean potentially that they're the ones who did the paperwork because they had to? Like, I've seen that in the real world. A lot of women have to do the paperwork because, quite frankly, once the paperwork is done, someone has to start paying child support. So sometimes it's convenient for men not to do the paperwork. This is not a commentary on men or women, good, bad. Just don't take it like that. This is just an example of one thing where data can be deceptive. That 70% number doesn't mean 70% of women are the ones ending the relationship. It just means they're the ones filing and doing the paperwork, even though they may not have been the ones who have done that. But it's constantly misconstrued. And this is every piece of data, whether it be about immigration, whether it be about, transgender issues, who's going to win an upcoming election. Like, it is constantly misportrayed and analyzed wrong on the internet, which is why I think a lot of journalists and academics and kind of Reddit fedora tippers get a lot of stuff wrong when it comes to like practically making predictions about where the world is going, because they're not looking outside their window. They're looking at the charts and they're looking at the graphs. So where am I going with this? This is going to be quite a rant. My point is, it's really hard to explain in stats or talking points or address in policy how social relationships really impact the real world in people's lives, which is why I think the immigration debate is so messed up. But what is one type of relationship that we can look at where we actually do have tons and tons and tons of data and research around it, and even legal cases documenting it all? Because the average person's interaction with a recent immigrant, we don't have that much data around, quite frankly. But what we do have a ton of data around is marriages. So I'm going to use that as like one of my prime examples here. If you're younger and you're tuning in, just so you're aware, chances are if you are ever in a legal dispute, it's probably going to be about a relationship. It's probably going to be some sort of marriage issue you are having, maybe even a business, social relationship falling apart, just Most of the time, if your life is blowing up, it's going to be a miscommunication problem with someone that you actually wanted to get along with. And it just, holy crap, like I am at that age, I don't know, 30 is like divorce o'clock, but everyone around me, there's long-term relationships or marriages are just blowing up right now. And watching it in reality and how it affects the world and people's lives, oh my gosh, like destroys them. It leads to drugs and addiction, people missing work or even losing their jobs entirely because they're just like psychologically checked out, nowhere to live, like financially destroys the family, destroys children psychologically. Like a marriage falling apart is civilization destroying stuff. Really, really bad. And just on top of that, like for everyone, the amount of social services and government programs, taxes, legal time that goes into this social relationship falling apart is insane. And I feel like people don't really process that until they really watch it happening around them. And a good portion of our societal problems beyond just like nuclear family falling apart are caused by nuclear family communities and relationships falling apart. Like you look at drug use or alcoholism after a marriage ends, or the type of person to get into crime. Like, did they have a broken family? So most of our societal issues come from individual social relationships falling apart. I mean, we'll look at it as like a point on a graph where it's like, oh, well, we've got X amount of drug users and that's a problem. We have X amount of homelessness and that's a problem. And then a lot of leftists, which is why I have a big problem with them, will say, well, we need to introduce a social program in order to fix this, number of drug addicts or homeless people. And it's like, well, why don't we ask them more questions about why that happened in the first place instead of just constantly putting band-aids on gaping wounds? Why don't we look at, oh, did they have a successful nuclear family? Wow, look at that, leftists. You're trying to destroy the nuclear family. And that's like the one thing that's holding people together and is like a place that they can go back to for emotional support, financial support, these kind of things. So maybe we wouldn't need all these social... Anyways, I could get into that. But my point is that social relationships falling apart is the collapse of society, individual social relationships. You can't talk about it in this like nebulous terminology. It doesn't get to the bottom of it. Now, what causes relationships to collapse? Usually a communication collapse. That's usually what does it, when you can't get through to one another, This is something that even the most liberal therapist will tell you. Despite what Matt Walsh says, they can be correct sometimes. Communication, the foundation of successful relationships. And guess what? That communication should go out towards a community as well, not just like your romantic partner. It's usually going to be a healthy community when the community can communicate as well, right? All right, still with me, libs? So it is this inability to get through to one another, to agree on similar values and boundaries, morality differences, what is viewed as right and wrong, or what your role is in a relationship or a partnership. And to be fair, this is actually where we can really stick it to the trad stereotypers. High education strongly correlated with relationship success, strongly correlated with reduced divorce rates. Why? Because these people tend to be able to communicate with one another better. Their reading, writing, ability to define words and be using the same words, understanding one's own psychology and emotional responses as well as the other person's. Pretty helpful stuff when it comes to formulating a relationship. So all these trads that are like, get married at 19 or you hit the wall, don't get an education, just do the trades. Not entirely correct there. The hype isn't worth it, all right? Education can be very helpful, and definitely waiting a little longer till your brain is able to properly... I'm not saying there aren't young people that can't do that. There are, but the data, the stats do show, and it makes sense, it logically makes sense that when you can communicate better and are higher educated, works out better. But now here's where we got to stick it to the utopian leftists. You know what is also strongly correlated with relationship success? Coming from the same cultural background. Who would have thought? Why? Why do you think that is? Same cultural references, same understanding of what a relationship should look like, how you do business, how you resolve conflict, what love is, what gender roles are, kind of a big important one. All of that. And if you're like, This is where the libs really get me, is they'll be like, well, people who have just moved to the country, they can learn those things and take them on. Like, that happens all the time, right? No, you are an idiot. You are an idiot if you think people don't strongly copy the examples given to them by their parents and community, particularly if they move from one community and culture into the same enclave of that community and culture in a new country. They're not really changing their environment, are they? And even when people have extreme influence from culture to be a different way than how they were raised, it doesn't always change them. It's quite hard to do. It's why people who observe domestic abuse as kids often repeat it as adults, no matter how much they learn from every institution in their country, school, movies, PSAs, all of it, not to do it, they still tend to repeat those patterns. It's very, very common because that's just what they learned as kids. It sticks with them. And once again, this is why cross-cultural relationships have high correlation with divorce, because no matter how much two people may like each other and may want to get along, and we're going to apply this to like wider immigration in a second here, but just imagine you're dealing with two people that more than anything want to be with each other, are dedicating all of their time to trying to make it work. But at the end of the day, when they both say, I love you, let's get married, all of those words may mean entirely different things to them based on the cultures they grew up in, which is why these relationships tend to be strained more and cause a lot of chaos. And once again, the reason I use marriages as my example is because we have the most public and legal information around them. We have the most anecdotes put together to kind of come to a conclusion that people aren't going to reject and deny. What we don't have a ton of well-documented data on is people's day-to-day interactions. But what I can tell you is that a lot of these same points you can extrapolate from marriages, you can put onto day-to-day interactions, except now imagine this, instead of two people who really, really want to get along and really, really love each other, you have a bunch of people that, quite frankly, don't really care if they get along or not. They just kind of want to get through their day-to-day lives and are having more difficult, more strained social relationships. That is such a recipe for success, isn't it? Really gonna go well. Boom. I mean, just think about this. Everyone would have examples. And it really is just the micro stuff. It all adds up, but there is macro as well. Like this is like everyday life, particularly for people in the neighborhoods where journalists and politicians are not growing up, who are dealing with the brunt of mass immigration crisis, where typically the people aren't even learning the new language to the country that they're immigrating to, and they don't really care to integrate. I'm talking about the Lutons. I'm talking about the Surrey BCs. I'm talking about, I know America has their own zones like this as well, but obviously Europe and Canada are a little bit ahead with the not even caring to call our culture a mixing pot, but calling it a cultural mosaic. So we don't even encourage people to learn to integrate and communicate. So anyways, like, the amount of people I hear that are upset, like, I can't even order a coffee at Tim Hortons anymore. I can't even talk to people on, helplines anymore. It's taken me an hour longer than it would if it's someone who spoke the same language as me, because we could just connect and get through. That causes cultural tensions, cultural differences with coworkers, like a constant thing we are seeing in day-to-day life here in Canada, certainly in the UK, fights breaking out between communities with high immigration rates. You're seeing differences around sexual norms and standards, increasing assault rates. Guess what? That causes a lot of problems in communities, different perspectives on the roles of women. You think liberals would care about this, but I don't know. They don't seem to care if the person's not white. This breakdown of daily social relationships between communities is what destroys civilization, because communities, nuclear families, people getting along and being able to work together is what makes civilization. And it is the working class world that is having more trouble holding together their nuclear families. They are having more trouble holding together their communities because, unlike the privileged rich politicians and journalists that are encouraging and making these policies of mass immigration, they don't have the same financial bed of money to fall back on if things go to crap for them. They fall through the cracks. They end up homeless. They don't have the same education background paid for and pampered by their parents to fall back on to assist with, community cohesion and communication. Like, they already need more help and assistance for community cohesion in the first place than these privileged politicians and journalists. And yet, no, they're getting thrown the least likely to integrate immigrants, minimum wage workers, people who aren't learning the language, people who have completely different values, into an already fractured community that absolutely needs nothing but the opposite of this. They need better schools, they need better healthcare, they need more assistance in creating cohesion. No, instead, a nuclear bomb is being thrown in by the elites who just want this utopian experiment based on their privileged perception of what immigration is. Oh, well, my immigrant friends speak perfect English. We get along just great. Yeah, your immigrant friends come from cosmopolitan, wealthy families that went to Oxford with you, you absolute ass. Like, I actually cannot stand these people. And this is where it comes to why I think it's so difficult for the average person to explain why they can't stand mass immigration, and why sometimes it does just come out in like blah, like racial stuff, is because it is quite frankly just intuition that they are living on a day-to-day level where they can see the social fabric of their community falling to pieces. Like, they know when I communicate to a person from another culture, they have different intentions and interpretations of what is going on in that interaction. When I interact with them, they have different, social allegiances. They're typically going to be hiring their siblings, their cousins, bringing over people from their home country. Like, it is not cohesive to healing the community that I grew up in when there is no integration, and at such a rate that people are creating entirely new communities that are at odds with my community within my community. Not good. Not good. Oh. This is really where I think the liberal journalist split happens. Building relationships and understanding ecosystems and how both animals and people work together is a really complex and delicate thing. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of respect, it takes like a true deep desire to understand one another. All right, I'm about to go on a really strange offshoot here, but stay with me, okay? I just did a little road trip down to California with some family and friends of mine, and I also went to go see a few acquaintances I have that are extraordinarily liberal. Of course, they're in California. But Lear Keith, she is a kind of feminist, environmentalist, writer, and Derek Jensen, who I've interviewed on this channel before, also like a very leftist environmentalist writer. And it's interesting because we'll talk a lot about, we're doing a piece on interspecies communication. I know that sounds schizophrenic right now, but just wait. Just wait till you watch it. It's really good. And we also spoke a little bit about immigration, just kind of off the record having a conversation. And I was explaining like my thoughts on the UK riots and the tensions happening, and how adding all of these new people into this dynamic really like blew it up, and was obviously going to lead to like ethnic and cultural clashes and violence. And they both understood what I was saying quite well, despite being extreme lefties. They like nodded and they're like, yeah, of course that makes sense. And they're thinking of it from more like a less data, less conservative perspective. They're probably looking at it more even from an environmental perspective. Like, they don't want tons and tons of immigration to certain areas because they want to protect the land. They want people to be able to live cohesively with nature around them. They think that the mass immigration stuff and overwhelming cities to the point where you barely have housing, not good for the human experience, right? But both of them are also highly integrated into nature, and they're constantly observing the ecosystems around them, how animals are interacting, how trees are interacting with insects, all of it. So they're like highly sensitive to how much effort it takes to build relationships, to understand ecosystems, and what a slow, delicate thing it is, and how easy it is to destroy them and disrupt them. And they, we can talk in that analytical way about creatures, like non-humans, for some reason, and be very aware that like adding new dynamics, even just adding like a bear that grew up in captivity or an animal that grew up in captivity into the wild same creature going into the same environment, but because of the way that it was raised, completely different interactions can blow things up. Like, we're able to talk about that with non-humans, but as soon as we talk about humans, it's like, no, 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 no. We're not like that. We're not like animals. We're different. We can have these utopian fantasies about how we interact, and it's all going to work out because I wrote it in this big book of liberal progressive ideas that are definitely going to apply to real life. And if you disagree, you're a racist. It's like, no, human interactions, whether you are from the same ethnic, cultural, whatever background or not, a very difficult, delicate thing that needs to be respected and understood and not just fobbed off as GDP number go up, but politicians need to actually consider what the day-to-day life of humans look like when you throw such a spanner in the mix as a whole different people with whole different ideas about morality, gender, family, all of that kind of stuff, politics. And this goes all directions. This isn't just about the West. This is about non-Western countries too. In fact, they're a lot more honest and think a lot more about this than we do. Look at places like Japan. Oh my goodness. But yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that. That complicates things. Anyways, the point is, it takes a lot of time and a true deep desire to understand one another, to actually integrate people into a community. And right now, we in the modern world are not even really taking the time to do that for the people around us in our community day to day. We're not talking as much and understanding who's living next to us as we did when we were younger. You know, I grew up, I just got the last bit of the 90s and the early 2000s, and you knew who every single one of your neighbors was still then. Even when you were playing video games, like you were playing video games with them in person, side by side. It was like Mario Kart on the N64, not online random person across the world that you'll never meet or really get to know. So we're not even doing this process of really integrating communities and understanding one another and having each other's backs with the people that live with us right now, let alone the animals around us or the nature around us. And it's why we're destroying all of it, quite frankly, because we're not taking the time to respect or understand it. We're all moving at this breakneck speed in this rat race of consumerism, and then we're trying to insert a bunch of new people with entirely different worldviews into this dynamic, all because certain sets of data tell us it may be good for the economy, might be good for GDP. Country, human number go up, well, money number go up. That's good. And if you disagree with this, you're racist and hate money or something. I don't know. Why are we basing our idea of what a good human life is and what a good country is on the GDP? I don't know. That's insane. No one in their day-to-day life is thinking like, wow, the GDP is up. My life is good. No, we have more people on antidepressants than ever. We have more people that just absolutely hate their day-to-day existence and are having trouble forming relationships and families than ever. We have more people that have a lack of community than ever. And maybe those things are just a little more important than number go up on graph, politician like that. This is insane. What we are doing right now, whether it be in the UK, whether it be in Canada, whether it be in America, whether it be Japan, I don't care, any country in the world. It's insane. Mass immigration is not informed by authentic human or spiritual experiences at all, and it shows a great degree of hubris and ignorance of the modern world and modern mind to think that this was something that was ever going to make sense or work out. Like, you need to respect nature and humans and how delicate our minds are and how delicate communities are and how thin our veil of civility is. And if you want to integrate new people and new ideas into that, we'll actually show respect for that by doing it in a way that's going to work. Not a way that is so quick that it's pretty obvious you don't give a crap about integrating real human relationships, but you just want to keep the housing numbers up, you know? You just want to keep cheap labor in your country, you know? And then you get away with it by calling everyone racist that criticizes this horrific policy. And once again, it's like the midwit meme. I'm sure you guys have seen it, where you have these working class people, they can't quite explain in the most analytical or articulate form why the mass immigration stuff bothers them, but they intrinsically know this change is not good for their communities because they're living it every single day. Then you have these highly educated people like Douglas Murray desperately writing books like The Strange Death of Europe saying, I figured it out. I know this is going to be the end of us. Please listen to me. And then you got these midwits who are living in unreality, calling both of these people racists rather than logging off of Reddit, putting down their textbooks, and looking out their window and living in their communities. It's so frustrating. And as long as our social debate remains in the world of highly manipulated data that is misinterpreted by these people and applied in their dreamland where they grew up around other extraordinarily rich, privileged, highly educated people, but educated in the form of, ooh, we can use words fancy, but we don't necessarily know what the average person's life is actually like and therefore can't make policies for them because we're just in our little bubble. If these people continue to control our social conversations and our political policy, we will just continue going down this path of fracturing the very social fabric that makes countries function. Because we're trying to apply a computer program, a theory on paper, the lives of the elite, highly wealthy, to the average person's life. And that's not going to work. That's not how humans are. You can't, you shouldn't be writing theory and then trying to make humans live it. You should be watching how humans live and then basing your theory around that. But we've gone backwards. Humans are more complex than the hopes of these utopians or the data sets of the researchers. We see this every election cycle. Oh, the polls are going to tell us who's going to... No, like, stop listening to these BS polls. Stop listening to these BS commentators that went to privileged universities and have no idea what's going on in the ground. Start listening to people who are just telling you like it is. This is why I could tell you, hey, there's going to be race riots in the UK. Like, there is going to be mass conflict. Why? Because none of my opinions were based off stuff I learned in school. It was just based off of looking at reality around me. And most people can do that. But unfortunately, those people aren't the ones being given microphones. And once again, I'm telling you right now, the people paying attention to real life instead of the online experts will be vindicated every time. Even if they don't want to be. I don't want to be vindicated anymore. I am sick of it. I'm sick of it. So someone else start saying this and getting in a lot of trouble. There are a lot of good people talking about this stuff. A lot of good people risking their lives. A lot of good people trying to protest it that are getting their butts put in jail in the UK right now. Did you ever think that would happen 5-6 years ago? No. So what do you think is going to happen 5 years from now? A whole lot of stuff we thought was way too extreme to ever predict today. It's not going to be good. But yeah, this whole rant honestly just seems like common sense to me. Like, wow, social relationships are really hard. You have to super respect them. Communication is highly important. Communication is more than just speaking the same language. It's having the same cultural references. It's having the same childhood and growing up and observing the relationship and the ideas your parents have, because that stuff sticks with you. And guess what? Importing a bunch of people who had a completely different experience and cultural references, not going to be good for community. And when community falls apart, countries fall apart. Like, this is 101. But liberals will keep doing this, so good luck, everyone. Good luck. I appreciate you watching this. More rants in the future. Stay tuned for interspecies communication, because honestly, I think I'm going to get through to the animals quicker than I will these liberals. I'll see you in my next video.